Hi, so welcome to the second part in the series on Retribution Paladin damage in Hellfire Citadel Mythic. In this part we're going to tackle the first three bosses, Hellfire Assault, Iron Reaver and Kormrok. With Hellfire Assault it's all about focusing your key priority targets, and you'll know what they are, and cleave when you can, because usually there are a couple of priority targets. So let's have a look at decisions to be made before the fight. So in terms of talents, movement talents, there's a fair amount of movement on this fight, so it's worth considering whether you go speed of light or long arm of the law. Now, as I mentioned before, my preference is usually long arm of the law for most fights, because it's a nice short little closer when you, especially having to do lots of movement between little groups. However, there might be times when you need to dash from your side to the middle of the room. Maybe it's taking you a little while to finish off your side and you're a bit late to the party, where speed of light would be more useful. So this one is a case of play it by ear and see which you personally prefer, or what you get the most benefit from. In terms of for most fights this tier, we will use Sanctified Wrath as standard, just like in Blackrock Foundry we use Divine Purpose. And there's really no need to think about that, but on this fight sometimes you sort of do, because when you're still struggling on the fight, I'd say it's still probably better to take Sanctified Wrath in most cases if you are using Avenging Wrath at the key times. However, once you've got it well under control, what you find yourself is that you're sitting, no matter which group's up, it doesn't last long enough. It doesn't last half a minute. So you pop Avenging Wrath, it doesn't matter when you do it. You're stood waiting with your wings up after it's all dead. So in that case, there's no point in prolonging Avenging Wrath, and there's no real need for the shorter cooldown and Hammer of Wrath either if you're largely cleaving, nor is there much need for the anything to do with that. So use Divine Purpose. If you find yourself waiting around a lot, you might find that you do overall more damage with that. Again, it depends on how much under control you've got things like the siege engines and the grunts and so on like that. If you find yourself still at a point where you're constantly inundated, you're only just finishing groups off before the next group spawns and all the rest of it, Sanctified Wrath may well still be better if you are using Avenging Wrath better. In terms of level 90 talents, Light's Hammer is the obvious one here. I can see whether you're struggling on the fight still or whether you've got it well under control and it's just a formality on farm, I can see no benefit to Execution Sentence on this fight, because although there are priority targets, there are usually two up at any one time, and one will be slightly high priority, but you'll still want to cleave onto the other, and Light's Hammer is ideal for that. You can use Light's Hammer on as few as two targets, and it gives you a lot more scope when you've got the big scrum in the middle as well. You use that with Avenging Wrath, so Light's Hammer all the way. Level 100 talents, Final Verdict is the obvious one. It's the cleave one, unless you've got a very poor quality weapon or like next to no mastery. I cannot see much serious benefit in Seraphim. I'm not saying you couldn't make it work, but because you can't possibly ensure that you've got Seraphim up for all the important events, you might as well just use Final Verdict. Gives you a better range on Divine Storm. And remember, these groups are not always together; they're often spread out, all the mobs, and also you can use your Final Verdict from further away when you're running from one group to another as well, to get that in a bit quicker. So I would definitely say Final Verdict. Now, in terms of the fight itself, as I mentioned, you've got to focus on those priority targets, but of course cleave onto others. So Seal of the Righteousness, have that up all fight really. The only time I would say switch is if you are in a situation where siege engines are taking a while to die and you are having to completely single target them. Maybe switch to Truth then. But in most cases, once you've got this fight under control, you're not in a position where you'll ever be on a single target for more than a few seconds. It's not worth the global cooldowns. Keep switching Seal, so just stay in Righteousness. You don't lose very much single target damage anyway. Hopefully the tanks will bring over the grunts and anything else they're tanking close to the siege engines anyway, which are usually your highest priority, or whatever is the top priority at that particular moment, so you can just cleave onto them anyway. Hammer of Righteousness at like 3 targets. Light's Hammer if you think there's going to be enough targets up for long enough. I mean, 3 or 4 mobs, if it's only going to be in for a few seconds, still a benefit if they're priority targets. Use that by all means. And of course, I'm assuming for all of these guys I mentioned before that you are going to be using the Empty Drinking Horn trinket along with whatever else. Now, Fell Cleave trinket, the Discordant Chorus, just bear in mind it's not an AoE trinket as such, it's a cleave trinket. Often what you find on this fight is the different groups, you're AoE in groups that are quite far apart, and the cleave trinket will only hit ones in your frontal cone. So if you're going to use that trinket, and of course it's an obvious one to use, why not? Just try and be facing, where possible or as much as possible, the largest group. Obviously you've got to make sure that your priority target is within that, but the direction you face is key when using this trinket. If you don't have that trinket, or it's a not good quality one, Unending Hunger is a good second one to use as well. In fact, that's a perfectly good one to use. It's a totally unreliable trinket, but then this is a totally unreliable fight. But yeah, that's pretty much all there is to Hellfire Assault. Okay, so Iron Reaver. First of all, this is a totally single target fight, of course. You have bombs onto which you may be able to cleave. In terms of talents, what we need to think about is, are we going to use Seraphim or are we going to use Final Verdict? Again, if you like Empowered Seals, go for it, but I'm not going to really talk about that because most people don't like it. I don't like it. I personally favour Seraphim still at the moment. This might move a little bit once we get to upgrade our gear by another 10 item levels, but for now I'm still favouring Seraphim on this particular fight, mostly because although the ring will be popped at the start, because that's just what people do, fuck them, and so you will fire off Execution Sentence and Avenging Wrath on the pull before Seraphim's up, but you can get Seraphim up quite quickly if you really go for it. And the thing is as well, next time you use Avenging Wrath, I'm going to assume there's going to be an air phase here, it will be after he's done Blitz, so you won't use it on the 1 minute mark anyway. So Seraphim will be up for that next use of Avenging Wrath, and every use of Avenging Wrath after that, because Blitz helps you out here because it occurs on the 1 minute mark, which prevents you using Execution Sentence and Avenging Wrath at that point. So you're waiting a few seconds anyway, by which time Seraphim's fine, go for it. But if you do want to use Final Verdict, and your weapon is a really good quality compared to the rest of your gear, all the usual things that make Final Verdict good, then you have the option then to cleave the volatile bombs rather than hard switch to them if necessary. Obviously don't let them blow up, you're not going to do much damage if the whole raid wipes, but it does mean you don't necessarily have to hard swap to them. You can just weave in a bit of a Divine Storm with a Final Verdict buff. If you are going to one phase this, then obviously you chain your Avenging Wraths, one after the other. So at the start, half minute mark, wait for the Blitz, then after he's finished the Blitz and you're back onto it, which also brings us on to what we use as a speed talent. Now this, it has to be said, if you're going to one phase it, you might be better off with Speed of Light, because I usually like Lamb of the Law just as a default speed talent anyway. But during the air phase, it's quite useful for moving from bomb to bomb or moving away from them if you get targeted with artillery. But if you're going to one phase it, there's only one time the boss moves, or you have to move any sort of distance, and that's when he blitzes. And if he blitzes way away from you, like miles away, then Long of the Law isn't going to help you at all, because you're not even in judgment range. So you need Speed of Light in that situation. So if you're going to if the aim is one phase in it, I would take Speed of Light so that you can close down that distance. Another little tip you can do, now this is slightly dicey, you usually use this say on the last Blitz, when he's nearly dead hopefully, and on the last part of the Blitz, not as he's moving away but as he's coming back, get over to him and hitch a ride halfway across and just bubble to avoid dying. That will that will be a good way of closing the damage as well. So if he's really going to blitz miles and miles away, you think even speed of light's not going to get there. Speed of light to the middle of the path, hitch a ride for the rest of the way, bubble, blah blah blah. So I've done that before. That one works. Other than that, it's all the usual things that you'll just need to remember. Maximizing DPS in a single target rotation. And if you're not sure what that is, just check out my intermediate Retribution guide, because that's still all relevant. In terms of trinkets to use, you'll want Empty Drinking Horn as always. After that, it sort of depends on quality. Ideally, what you'd want is the class trinket. You're not expecting, apart from during Blitz, to ever lose stacks. And even then, there is a chance you won't lose your stacks. It is annoying if you do, because the irony is with the class trinket is you're using the ring right at the start. Well, you haven't got your stacks built up, so your class trinket's of relatively little use then. Of much less use anyway. And then after the Blitz, where if your stacks drop again, after the second Blitz, that's when the ring's likely to be used again if it's still not dead, but you are trying to one-phase it. So, and of course, if you are going to have an air phase, the ring is still likely to be used when the boss comes back down, and again, you will definitely have lost your stacks then. So it's a tricky one, just have to see how it goes. But the only other option realistically is Unending Hunger. If your Unending Hunger is a much better quality than your class trinket, maybe it's worth it. It's just that it's an unreliable trinket in terms of consistent DPS. Okay, for Kormrok, it all very much depends on how your guild chooses to do it. Which pulls you're going to be going to, how much of a problem are the dragging hands. If you're not going to get many dragging hands and they get blown up in like 2 seconds flat, there isn't very much point in preparing yourself too much for that, and you should treat it as a single target fight. Now, in terms of talents, in terms of the ones that might change, between Final Verdict and Seraphim, if the hands are going to be an issue, then Final Verdict, regardless of anything else. Because what you can do is, as the hands are going to spawn, you can make sure you've got yourself your Final Verdict buff, make sure that you've got 5 Holy Power, so that as soon as they spawn, you can immediately Divine Storm, use something, Hammer of Righteousness, for example, and Final Verdict again. Hopefully get an Empowered Divine Storm. If you don't, then you're not going to get anything else off you. In fact, you might as well just use Divine Storm without the Final Verdict buff, quite frankly, because you're not going to do any more good. I wouldn't choose Light's Hammer. Light's Hammer, if you wanted to pad, yes, that's obviously the way to go, because even if those hands are only about for 2 seconds, the sheer number of them means that it will do quite a lot of damage, especially if you're using a tactic where you get dragging hands throughout the fight, like you're expecting a significant number of them. Again, you'll have to judge this. It depends how quickly you kill the boss. It depends which pools you go to, all the rest of it. But I wouldn't recommend that. I would still treat it as essentially the fight ends when the boss dies. The hands, even if they last several seconds and you want to sort of help out on those, you're not going to need Light's Hammer to do that. Really not. But in terms of maximising damage on the hands, another thing you can do, apart from what I've just said there, is with Avenging Wrath. Now, you might be tempted to pop Avenging Wrath as the hand spawn. No. You want to do it about 6... If you want to hold your nerve, 7 seconds maybe, before the hands are actually due to spawn. The reason for this is if you pop it when the hands spawn, the hands will last a few seconds. You're only going to get the first few ticks of your 4-set bonus. Whereas if you pop Avenging Wrath before that, then you're into like 8, 9, 10th stack when you fire off your Divine Storm. And if that Divine Storm is an Empowered Divine Storm with your Final Verdict buff, that will blow the crap out of them. It will absolutely blow them up. So you want to think about that. Obviously fire off your Execution Sensors at the same time as your Avenging Wrath, and if you can, if it's off cooldown. Otherwise just delay that for a bit, don't worry about that. And the other thing, of course, make sure that you've got Seal of Righteousness. In terms of trinkets, I would treat this as a single target fight regardless, and I would go for Obviously, Empty Drinking Horn is always the standard. I would tend not to go for Discordant Chorus. It's of no use whatsoever, except when either Dragging Hands are up or the Crushing Hand, and even then it's debatable as to how much it's not benefiting the raid, it's not benefiting the boss kill. And so Clash Trinket is possible as long as you don't have to soak miles away from where the boss jumps into a pool. Sort of judge that one. If you're going to keep losing your stacks, obviously maybe better with Unending Hunger. Otherwise, Clash Trinket, if it's a good quality one, if it's at least the same quality as your other trinkets, like all heroics or all mythics or whatever, then go for that. In terms of other parts of the fight, stake your position for pound really early so that you're not wasting DPS time, especially as some of these pounds occur when you're going to have Avenging Wrath up. Watch out for fell outpouring. Make sure you've got your gap sorted out, because if you don't, you're likely to have to bubble, and if you're bubbling at the same time as Avenging Wrath, oh dear, bad mojo. It sometimes has to be done, it sometimes happens, but there you go. So do have a little look around at that and sort yourself out, because obviously what you cannot do is go, oh no, I need to move here, and you move across someone during pound, which is bad enough, and at the same time as fell outpouring, you might end up killing someone. And so yeah, avoid that. And other than that, it's just a case of know how long the fight's expected to take, so you can plan out your use of Avenging Wrath. This is one of those fights that can be quite short, and worst thing to do is find out that you got to the end of the fight and you didn't use one of your charges of Avenging Wrath. So do make sure they get used, but also make sure you get maximum benefit from them. Know when the both uses of the ring are going to be occurring as well, so you can line up, because you don't want your Avenging Wrath to go off and then 10 seconds later the ring is popped. It's like, oh, I've just missed my 4 set then. Thanks very much. So try and make sure you know when that's going to happen and line it up with it. Okay. But that's it for the second part. Third part should be with you in a few days.